Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for today's edition of Words of Love. We're continuing to discuss exactly that. We're discussing these incredible words of love that were found in Scripture. And specifically today, I want to talk about help, helping one another. To kind of kick this off, there's a story that I've told before and gotten in trouble for at churches because it involves a political figure, but I'm not telling it for political reasons. It's a human interest reason. But several years ago, in near Waco, Texas, a boy and his father, they were in a field working, and while the dad was distracted by some livestock, his son wandered a little bit too close to an irrigation ditch. Uh, Pretty soon, this little boy lost his footing, got washed into a culvert. So he got stuck. He couldn't get himself out. The father, seeing what had happened, rushed over to try and help, but this little boy was wedged in there pretty good. His foot was behind him, and there was just no way of getting him out of there safely. And because this boy was now acting like a cork, water was starting to fill up behind them. So this father, with his son's head in his arms, trying to make sure that he kept his head above the water line, is trying to get attention. He finally got the attention of another farmer who's across the street, and they made a call to to 911. But we're talking rural Texas here. It's not like being in the middle of the city where you can have somebody there pretty quickly. They were told that the nearest help was at least 15 minutes away, and that was going to be pushing it. So his father is beginning to lose hope because he knows that in 15 minutes it's going to be too late, that his son will be all the way under the water, and there's nothing he can do about it. Fortunately, very nearby, there was a very powerful man with resources and variety of resources, and he heard this call go out on the radio, and he was just a 3-minute helicopter ride away. So he loaded his own personal medical team and his own private security team, his own detail, and they went up and they went to go help. And when they got there, this boy was barely visible. Just his face was above the water. So this man he had his security detail go out and start digging a bigger reservoir around this boy and his dad so that the water would start to go down just a little bit to give him some more time. He sent his medical team in to help the dad with whatever needed to happen in that moment. And then he got on a tractor that was left by the other farmer and began digging away at the top of the culvert to hopefully unbury the pipe and be able to get the boy out. And this was an incredible day because the boy was saved because of the work of this team who saw the needs of this little child and put all other things aside. On that day, President of the United States, George W. Bush, saw a need. He knew that he had the capacity to do something about it, and he did it. He put all of his resources into this need in the moment. The most powerful person in the world emptied himself of all of his resources to help a nobody in the middle of nowhere. Conversely, a few years before that, a different president, he and his detail saw a woman broken down on the side of the road with a child in the middle of nowhere in a very heavy snowstorm. The detail asked that maybe we should stop and give a hand, and this president's response was, "Why? Keep driving. Someone else will help." And we may think that, that's a little bit cold-hearted, but nobody really expects someone like that. Nobody really expects a president to help somebody on the side of the road with a broken down car or replacing a tire. The general belief is, well, they're just too important to deal with those kind of problems. And in worldly ways, that's probably true. But that's not kingdom values. Jesus said, if you want to be great, you must be a servant of all. That the more you give of yourself and serve other people, the greater you are in the kingdom of God. So what does it mean to love like Jesus? That's a loaded question, right? What does it mean to love like Jesus? Paul in Romans 15:2 says, each one of us needs to look after the good of people around us, asking ourselves, how can I help? So look for how Jesus may be disguised as that hurting person in your life. Maybe, maybe as you're at the water cooler on a Monday morning, maybe this is the person who's talking about all the things that went wrong over the weekend. Maybe they're another parent at a kid's soccer game. Jesus might be the person behind you in the grocery store line who just looks like their whole life is falling apart. Maybe Jesus is the person who is the most unlovable person you know. Maybe he's the person who you know is carrying a very deep, deep hurt and just can't bear to say anything about it. And if you want to serve Jesus, according to what the Bible says multiple times over, you have to start by showing up for the people who are around you. Paul in Romans 12:13 says, when God's children are in need, you need to be the one to help them out. And to get into the habit of inviting guests into your home for dinner, or they need lodging for the night. You, not somebody else, you need to do it. And this applies to us as well, that we are all responsible for doing this thing, that you are to provide for whatever that need is. For example, there are many people in your church, in our church, in a neighborhood, even in a family where there's a single mom, who is working tirelessly to put food on the table. Or maybe there's a widow out there who's just lonely. They're sitting in this big empty house all alone with no one to talk to. Or there's a student who's just overwhelmed by the demands of life and they're anxious because of everything that's happened over the past couple years with COVID. And what Jesus is saying is, how can you love them like I would today? How can you love that single mother who's struggling? How can you love that widow who's alone in their house, wishing that somebody would just call and say hello? Well, how are you going to love that student who's overwhelmed by life? How are you going to love the person who's filled with anxiety because of everything that's happened during the era of COVID? How are you going to love somebody as Jesus would today? So that's important, right? And I want us to talk about this a little bit. We have a couple discussion questions. I hope that you'll engage in these questions with us. Number one, if you're not currently aware of the hurts of people in your life, how can you find out if there are struggling people out there, and how can you help them?
I would say if you didn't know the hurts in your life, I start by asking people about themselves. Because people really do like to talk about themselves. And not so much about in an egotistical way, but like when you give people kind of like a soapbox to stand on for a minute and they talk about what they're passionate about, they'll share. Mm-hmm. And it really just takes you slowing down and being observant, because even like you said, the person in the grocery store line, we've been put in each other's paths for a reason. Mm-hmm. So even if you just compliment their shoes and they're like, man, thanks. Like that might have been all they needed in their day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think being observant is a big one, because if you slow down and you look around, you're going to notice way more than you usually do, especially if you're, like you said, in the grocery store, you're doing your own thing. Like you're thinking about buying your groceries, but if you stopped and looked around at the people that are in the room with you, you might notice signs of where someone could be struggling. And, you kind of said all of it. That's the
Sorry.
easy way that it works. But yeah, I think asking people, being intentional with people, because a lot of people don't realize that somebody wants to listen to them. So just lending your ear and observing people around you will just help you start to learn about people. And it'll start to become habit. If you start to, do it every day, it'll become more natural for you to notice.
I think there's an old song that says, everybody hurts sometimes, right? And that's true. Everybody has a hurt. Everybody has something in their life that they are really wanting to talk about. Now, they might not do it quickly. A lot of times they'll need to have some trust with the person that they're confiding in. I'm a pretty open book with a lot of people, but not everybody's like that. And sometimes people don't even really understand what the hurt is. They just know that there's something wrong. But everybody has something. I think that's part of what helps us as humans connect with one another. Because you don't really have a deep soul connection with the people who you just party with all the time. The people that you have that deep connection with, the people that when you share your common struggles and pains and hurts, so people value being able to talk about that stuff, but they're probably going to need a little bit of trust. So think about the people that you're closest with, and then maybe ask some real questions. Don't just ask about the weather. Ask about, you ask somebody how their day was, and they say, it was good. It's like, are you sure about that? It seemed like there was a little bit of hesitation. And a lot of times people will open up. Question number 2. How did Jesus model for us what it means to be a servant? So, there's obvious reasons, but in his servitude, what aspect of that stands out most clearly to you? What speaks to you the most?
I think for me, when you said it, the first thing that came to my mind was, Jesus washing feet. I think that's a common one for our minds to go to. But if you really think about what that meant, and, it's not like they had shoes the way we have shoes, and think about the area they lived in and how disgusting people's feet really were. Like, I'm weird about feet. Like, I don't really like feet. I've done the foot, like, where you wash someone else's feet before, but it was hard for me. And that's with people that wear shoes, because I'm just weird. I know there's probably some other people out there that feel the same way, but for Jesus to wash people's feet, like, I feel like that's such care you're showing a person. Like, so I think that's what the first thing that sticks out to me is that someone like Jesus is willing to wash feet. So how could we not be willing to do the same thing?
Yeah. I really just love the way he broke societal boundaries to go to where the hurting people were, kind of as a servant, bringing that love into the darkest places, like where they didn't expect to find light. I've just really been meditating a lot on how he went to the well in the middle of the day, knowing who he was going to find there. It wasn't a surprise to Jesus that there was a woman there gathering water. His purpose was intentional. And I think if we're doing that, if we're intentionally going out and serving the people who are hurting, go where the people are hurting, and go with a purpose of how can I serve you, not how can I fix you, how can I let me tell you everything and you need to know how to fix yourself. Like, it's just go let them be heard, give them a voice, and let them know they're cared and loved for.
And then number 3, what are some ways you can pursue creative outlets and opportunities for ministry? So things that might be out of the typical norm when people think about ministry.
I just keep going back to, I want to have a host a painting class. So there's that, which is And the style that I really enjoy is the ones that kind of tap into your psyche a little bit and teach you a little bit about what you're thinking about. And there's a couple that I did with kids growing up, or with my kids' classes as they were growing up, and I think those would be fun for people. I still haven't done it. It's just time. It's like there's just
Okay.
there's no time. Time does not exist. It's irrelevant.
I feel like, I mean, as for some people, this comes easily, like that friendliness aspect of being out in the world with people. I, am introverted, and so my inclination is I go through self checkout. I don't talk to people. I do my own thing. I don't. So I think I miss a lot. And there's a lot to be said for your actions and how that portrays you and how that shows Jesus to people, because it's not common for people to be kind to strangers anymore. So sometimes just smiling at a person or holding a door or anything like that can make a really big impact. And I know that I'm missing those things because of, I'm thinking about whatever, or, something, people like to pay for people's coffee in line or whatever. Even just small things like that, I tend to miss the small opportunities. And I want to make room for those because I know that people notice things like that. And I know that that's something that I struggle with. So I don't know if that's considered like unique, but I think it's something easy and simple that if you can like get yourself to be doing it, that it can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, yes, a lot of my ministry for the last couple of years has been very public. But I think I'm probably most gifted at the smaller mentoring style of ministry. So finding a project to do with somebody and doing that thing together, whatever that thing is. Maybe it's woodworking, maybe it's something else. But I like that smaller mentoring opportunities. So, I mean, I would love it if we could, in the process of doing a church plant, if we can get an intern in here that we can help as a team, really walk through what it means to be in full-time ministry, helping prepare that person, kind of like Paul prepared Timothy for full-time ministry, and hopefully setting them up for more success down the road, because there's this huge perception of what people think ministry is going to be all about. I know that you've struggled with this. Devin struggled with this. I struggled with it. Bree, to an extent. Matt. And it's really easy to think, well, this is what I saw from a distance ministry being, but then when you're in it, it's something very different. And it can really mess you up. Especially, the ugly sides of ministry, when people are mistreating you and being downright ugly towards you. And how do you cope with this person who's supposed to be a spiritual leader treating you like you're garbage? How do you wrestle with wanting to stay in ministry in that moment? Because that's a hard thing to wrestle with. So I think I can offer some help there, because I've had the benefit of having most recently a very good leadership team, but I've been in some leadership environments that were pretty ugly and awful. So I think that's an area where I can grow. What about you? How can you help somebody? It's a word that we don't often think very much about in the Christian world. We think of help as being, well, if I ask for help, that means I'm being needy. But that's not really what it is. It's this camaraderie, it's partnership, it's part of being in a relationship with each other. So think about the person in your life or people in your life who you could help, not because you think that are needy, but because you love them. And how can you do that? How can you love them as Jesus would love them? We'd love to see your comments below. Please like and subscribe this page, and we'll talk to you soon.